Hello, I'm Scott Alsop. I'm a history teacher who's been delivering the Cambridge IGCSE History course for, well, quite a few years. And in this video, I'm going to share my top tips for Paper 4, the alternative to coursework. Now, I've spent a lot of time teaching the course, looking at examiners' reports and looking at mark schemes and reviewing exemplar essays from the exam board to work out exactly what the examiner wants you to do in your answer. Now, as you're aware, or should be aware, Paper 4 is a 1-hour exam that focuses exclusively on your chosen depth study. Now, according to the examiner's reports, the majority of responses are on Germany 1918 to 1945, with the USA and Russia also proving pretty popular. Now, that's not to say that if you're doing a different depth study that you're at a disadvantage. It just means that there aren't as many students answering, and so there aren't as many responses for the examiner's reports to be based on. But let's cut to the chase. What exactly are you expected to do? Well, by now, you should be comfortable with the idea of exam questions being marked according to specific level criteria. The examiner reads your response and fits it into what are referred to as level descriptors. These are generic descriptions of what a student might do in their work, and they're structured like a kind of ladder of attainment. The better your answer, the higher the level that you receive. Paper 4 is marked out of 40 marks across 5 levels, meaning that as well as identifying the level descriptor that best fits your work, the examiner also has to choose how well your work does what the descriptor says. It's really therefore quite important that you are aware of these generic level descriptors, and I'll assume that your teacher shared them with you, since they give really clear instructions on what you need to do to secure the best marks. But to be fair, they're not that clear, and so the purpose of this video is to try and explain exactly what they're meant to look like. Well, the purpose of Paper 4 is to test your ability to meet 2 clear assessment objectives. Firstly, the examiner wants to see how well that you can recall, select, organise and deploy detailed and specific knowledge of your chosen depth study. Secondly, they want you to construct a balanced historical explanation using contextual knowledge of the topic. Now, all of this probably sounds quite scary, but the reality is that you should be doing this anyway, because at its core, you should probably look at Paper 4 as being an extended version of Question C from Paper 1. Now, when you open the exam paper, you'll be faced with a number of different depth studies, but obviously you should only look at the topic that you've actually done in class. Then, within the topic that you've studied, you'll find 2 questions on which you should choose one to answer. The examiner's report raised a concern that some students don't follow this simple instruction and instead answer both. Do not make that mistake. You just don't have time to do 2 questions in the time allowed. Now, the questions themselves are what you might have heard me refer to previously as how far questions. That is, they require a balanced analysis of 2 sides of an argument. However, the Paper 4 questions almost exclusively ask you how significant or how important a particular factor was to making an event happen. In fact, of the hundreds of questions that I've now seen across the different depth studies, pretty much half of them ask how important something was, while the other half ask how significant something was. The first thing that you need to do is to spend a bit of time therefore choosing which of the 2 questions you want to answer. Now, that probably seems obvious, but this one question on Paper 4 is worth 27% of your total IGCSE grade, so you really do need to choose wisely. Make sure that you read the questions closely, focusing on the specific terms included in the text and any dates. Some of the questions give a specific time frame, such as the 1920s or after 1934. So you really must ensure that all your examples are drawn from that exact period. Anything outside those dates is frankly irrelevant and won't gain you any marks. Remember also that the question requires a balanced response. In addition to the factor given in the question, you must have enough knowledge of other factors to provide a counter-argument. The examiner's report recently highlighted that good responses were often briefly planned to examine a range of material that could be used to address the question in a balanced style. Planning is therefore vital for this question, as you have to focus closely on just one issue for a whole hour. I therefore strongly suggest that you draw a little comparative chart in which you briefly note down evidence and examples on the two sides of the argument. You can then refer back to this as you progress through your answer. Something else that's pointed out a number of times in the examiner's reports is the need to be analytical rather than plainly narrative. Remember that these are questions about importance or significance, and so you need to clearly explain how or why each example that you include was significant to the topic being explored. If, for example, you're exploring an answer to a question about, the importance of the SS in securing Hitler's rule in Germany, you obviously need to give a range of examples of what the SS actually did. However, to properly answer the question, you must also show how these actions helped to secure Hitler's rule in Germany. For example, you could base your analysis on the effect that each factor had in terms of how many people it affected, or how widespread a particular issue was. Now, if you're used to using the point evidence explanation format or something similar to help you structure your paragraphs, you should already be very used to writing analytical responses like this. However, it really doesn't hurt for me to say this again. You must ensure that every point you make refers back to the exact wording of the question. Don't just examine the facts. Make sure that they are relevant to the question. The examiner's report makes this quite clear when it says that some responses provide generalized comments or lists that do not address the issue in the question. Frankly put, if the question asks how important the Great Depression was to Hitler's rise to power, then your explanation should probably include the phrase, "This was important to Hitler's rise to power because." So, clearly answering the question analytically is vital. So too is ensuring that you include some balance. Remember that the question will ask you to judge how important or significant something was. This means that you must offset it against other factors. Now, if we return to my earlier example, say the one about the importance of the SS in securing Hitler's rule of Germany, you obviously need to explain the things that the SS did to secure Hitler's rule. However, there were other reasons that Hitler was able to secure his rule as well. To gain the highest marks, you must discuss these as well. Paper 4 therefore requires you to have a very detailed knowledge and understanding of the issues that you're talking about. This isn't called a depth study for nothing, so make sure that you take a look at my other videos which cover the depth studies on the paper. Finally, the examiner's report states that the best answers make supported judgments and conclusions with a sustained line of argument. This means that your overall opinion, whether the factor in the question was the most important or not, should clearly match with the evidence that you present. It's no good writing an essay that puts forward a constantly strong argument on the importance of the SS to Hitler securing his rule, but then throw in a conclusion where you say that actually Nazi propaganda was most important. You can only reach a conclusion if the evidence points you towards it. Therefore, you should use your planning time at the start to think through your entire argument and determine the conclusion that you'll be making. The very best answers will also clearly outline this line of argument in the introduction. We often call this a thesis statement, and that indicates to the examiner your exact line of argument. If you're going to say that the SS was the most important factor in securing Hitler's rule, say so in your introduction, but then also acknowledge that other factors contributed and that you plan to discuss them as well. At the end of each paragraph, the best explanations would then say how the reason that you've given meant that the SS was the most important for securing Hitler's control. When considering one of the other non-SS factors, your explanation would show how it contributed to Hitler securing control, but why it still wasn't as important as the SS. So, coming to my conclusion, I'm going to try and quickly summarise the things that you need to do to perform well on paper 4. Firstly, select your question really carefully. Ensure that you have a detailed knowledge of the specific terms and the time frame stated in the question. Then take a bit of time to sketch out a plan for your answer. This could be as simple as a 2-column chart where you list evidence that supports the question statement on one side and presents other factors on the other. Next, you need to write an introduction that says what you're going to argue. If you agree with the statement in the question, say so. If you disagree, say so. Then, as you write your answer, make sure that every point you make uses specific and detailed evidence that you link directly to the question. You need to use paragraphs to properly structure your work as a balanced argument and to ensure that your judgments reflect the evidence that you present using the exact wording of the question. Ultimately, as I said earlier, at its heart, Paper 4 is really just an extended version of Question C from Paper 1. It isn't anything to be scared of, but you must ensure that you explain every point you make with direct and specific reference to the question. Good luck.